Hi everyone, welcome back to Living with Anxiety, Panic, and PTSD. I'm your host Enrique, and today will be our last video on building support systems, and the focus will be on dealing with tough conversations. Um, I want to welcome back my special guest. I'll go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Belladonna. I'm 20 years old. Nice to meet you again. um, so I guess we'll get into it and start off with what exactly are tough conversations.
So, tough conversations um, are the ones that we have with the people we deal with the most, and have the most impact in our lives, and that would be like our parents, um, bosses, coworkers, and basically anyone in our life that we deal with a lot. So um, they're the situation get pretty tricky because you kind of have to determine how much and what to say to them, right?
Right.
And the cool thing is you've been there for a few of my tough conversations, most specifically with my mom. So you've had firsthand kind of view at how they can go
Yeah.
and how I guess energetic they can be sometimes. Um, so what do you think like the first thing would be to deciding whether to have a tough conversation? Like what do you think would be the most important aspect of that?
I mean, I would think it'd just be how comfortable you are with what's going on, you know,
Okay, with yourself.
with yourself. Like if you're not, let's say you have panic and you're not accepting of the fact that you're panicked, you're probably gonna put yourself in a panic attack if you try to have a tough conversation
Right,
without even you yourself accepting that.
right. That is one of the more important ones. There's a second one too that's I think as up there as being as comfortable with it as yourself. The other one would be like how important this person is in your life,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like I guess you have to decide how much time and energy you want to spend on having a conversation with this person, right? Like if it's somebody like your mom or your significant other or maybe even your boss, right? Like you want to keep them in the know to certain levels,
Right.
right? And like your mom and significant other, you'd probably be really open with them, but it's still gonna be a tough conversation, right? Because like they're a reflection of you, or they reflect on you. Whatever you can see in their face, how they feel about you, or what they think about you,
I
right?
mean, you mentioned that you've had really tough conversations with your mom. What was like one of the hardest things you ran into having those conversations with her?
Well, with my mom, like she's very old. She was very old school, right? And what I mean by that is like before now or in the past few years, like disabilities of any kind were kind of unmentionables, right? And mental disabilities or mental issues were not even looked at as a disability at all. They weren't even mentioned. Like,
Like they're made up.
yeah. And the thought process was, it doesn't matter. Keep going and worry about that on your own time, in your own, without having other people see it. So her mindset was a lot like that, and when I first approached her about it, probably was when I first got put out on disability um, back in 2017, right? And um, she had asked me how work was going, which, if you've dealt with anybody of that era, right, like work is kind of a measure of what type of productive person you are. So when she asked about it, and I told her, oh, I had to, I'm on a leave of absence. I'm dealing with a lot of mental issues right now. Her first response was, well, you worry too much. Like that was the first thing that came out of her mouth, and I was like, you're right. That's really the problem. And it was really frustrating, honestly. The the wall that you kind of have to overcome to convince somebody who doesn't really believe in those issues, right? And the amount of energy that you really have to spend um, to try and convince someone like that. So
So, would you put it past someone if they lied about how work was going, like in that situation,
you,
or what stopped you from just being like, oh, work's good, and just passing on the moment?
I that's a great question, and I think it's an important one for anybody who's about to have a tough conversation to think about the answer to that, right? And no, I wouldn't I wouldn't like look at anybody differently for um, deciding not to say anything at that point. I think that's where the measurement happens, right? Like you get asked the question and then you decide, look, is this a person that I want to spend energy on trying to convince? Are they important enough to me, right?
Right.
Is this relationship important enough to build and grow in that way? And we'll find that a lot of people don't really warrant that much explanation, right? Like, it's sad to say, but even some of our friends won't have that deep of a look into our lives or how we're doing. Um, but when it came to my mom, I thought, okay, well, I really want her to understand me. I really want her to know what's going on in my life, and I also wanted to help her grow, right? Because one of the things that we do with each other in relationships is we change each other, right? And in order to do that, we have to have kind of educational conversations with each other. That means we're totally honest and we're open to listening to the other person's point of view and understanding where it's coming from, and then trying to figure out good ways to respond to them, right? Yes, convey is a good word. Convey the
Your ideas, without like getting coming off as defensive or trying to attack someone.
yes, and that's really hard because um, when somebody doesn't believe in something, right, everything is offensive or an attack.
And it's really easy for them to get worked up most of the time.
Yes, and it's funny that so many people are very entrenched in the beliefs that they have, right? And if what you're saying goes against that belief that they've already built up, it feels like a personal attack. You're basically saying what you think is wrong, and that means you are wrong.
Yeah.
So it's a tough conversation, but I think if you've decided that somebody deserves, that energy from you, then you have to consider your audience, right? Like, where are they coming from? Why do they have this mindset or thought of disabilities or mental health issues? And then go from there. Like, kind of like build a plan of how you're going to get somebody to learn this new skill set, right? And with my mom, the first part was to kind of help her understand what I meant by anxiety and panic, right? Because when most people hear anxiety and panic, they think of the common anxiety, right? Like that everybody gets when they're giving a speech or showing up to their first day of school. Interviews, and while it's similar to that, it really grows exponentially once you start looking at all of the effects that happen, right? So the first thing I did was explain to her how I feel when I'm having anxiety, right? And that meant letting her know that I'm always worried about things that are only in my head, right? They're not even happening, and the possibility of them happening is probably very small. But in my head, they've already happened.
Right.
And I'm worried about the outcome.
They've not only happened, but they've happened 10 different ways.
Right.
Getting to the same ending and being like, wow.
Right.
What am I going to do?
Yeah. And so that worry builds up, and then it leads to a panic attack, which I had to explain to her was literally me feeling like I'm already dying from this thing that happened in my head, and the over time, I think I spent quite a few conversations with her, and you were there for a few of them, and over time the explanations of what was going on, and she asked really good questions sometimes of like why or how, and we'd have to get into some of the traumas, you know, that led to, the why and the how. And in that sense, like you really have to be comfortable with enough with this person that you're communicating with to reveal those things. Um,
And I mean, it's definitely important though to like, you can have different levels of comfort, like you were
right,
saying earlier, of like what you want to go into. Like with your mom, you would definitely go into like all the way back to childhood drama. But with your boss, you don't have to sit there for like hours on a spiel, be like, so when I was 8 years old,
right,
you can decide where the line is, and I mean that's important with setting boundaries with people.
yeah, and also really important to kind of measure the relationship itself, right? Um, Same with the significant other, right? The categories would be like your mom and significant other would probably be in the same type of category where you're really open and everything's kind of on the table. When it comes to like boss and coworkers, you want them to know just enough so that they understand what's going on with you, but you don't feel like they're judging you about what's going on
Yeah.
because you haven't gone through this whole, other level of explanation. So, and that's where it gets tricky, right? How do you tell your boss, hey, I'm going through this? Because by law, you really don't have to talk about your medical conditions, right? But I've found personally that being honest enough and saying, look, this is what I deal with, right? And letting them know, look, it's got nothing to do with my work on a daily basis, right? It's basically a combination of everything going on in my life that kind of leads to this thing, and being honest with yourself about how much you can handle at work, right? So you can have that good conversation with your employer or coworker saying, hey, look, this is where I'm at, and this is what I can do, and this is, how I'm feeling. Like, I want to make sure that I'm as productive as I can be for you. So let's figure out the right way to use me for the team, right? In that type of conversation, you just have to be comfortable with yourself, right? Because
I was actually just thinking of how like uh, being comfortable with yourself. All leading up to that, I feel like all the conversation, like all the thinking you're doing, those can all very much be considered tough conversations
right,
because like you have to, measure out your like what's it called, your own levels of like how important something is. Like,
right,
am I willing to address this with myself? Am I comfortable enough to be like, this is what's happening?
exactly.
So there's different looks to it,
Yeah,
not just with other people.
and you make a good point, and we're probably the toughest conversation. Like having that conversation with yourself, like admitting to yourself, hey, this is actually something that I'm actually struggling with, and not something that I can hide anymore. Or like this feeling that I'm having is actually a real feeling that has physical side effects. Um, those are like probably some of the toughest conversations I think I've had with myself.
So on like a little scale, you've obviously had both with other people and with yourself.
Right.
Like, how would you rate which one would be tougher? Like the beginning of talking to your mom, or like talking with yourself?
I think the hardest conversations are with ourselves. And that's only because we lie to ourselves a lot, right? Like I'll wake up in the morning and I'm gonna say I feel okay, and when people ask me how you doing, living life, enjoying it, right? Because
Yeah.
we're if we admit anything other than that, then we literally just admitted, hey, I'm not okay. So that conversation with yourself about, hey, is something wrong? How are you feeling? what do you need today? Like that's probably the toughest one. But it doesn't mean that the conversation with like your mom or your significant other is less. I think they're pretty close to the same level because your mom or your parent, right?
That's your support system.
Yeah, that's your main support system, right? Your significant other and your parents, they're the first people that we turn to, and they're the ones we we value their opinion about us more than we value other people's opinions about us, right? So if our mom has this opinion of us like, oh, you're just making crap up, then that's kind of hard to deal with,
Yeah.
right? Because then it sets you back to thinking, okay, am I just am I just having these things? And so, I think the cool thing that happens when you start having these conversations, um, even if you're not fully ready to have the full conversation with yourself, once you start having these conversations with like your significant other or your parent, like it'll force the conversation to happen with yourself, right? You'll kind of like they'll ask you those tough questions that make you give the real answer, like, hey, yeah, and it's gonna get emotional,
Mm.
and it's gonna get frustrating, and that's where the energy level comes in, right? How much energy are you willing to put in? And sadly, like we give up easily, right? Just in general, when we're having conversations with people, we feel the pushback, or we feel like somebody's not listening. We're like, oh, I can't talk to this person, right? But what I found, especially dealing with my mom, was that sometimes we have to go back with the same information and the same message in a different way, in something that the other person can understand and relate to internally,
Mm.
right? Um, and in finding those different ways, we have to think about how that person is receiving the message, right? How they reacted to what we said, um, and and is it something that we're saying to make them react that way, right? Because you got to remember, everybody's gone through trauma, and the traumas may not be the same, right? Um, and there's different levels of trauma. Even the person you're talking to has probably dealt with traumatic events in their lives, and I know one of the people I talked to in the past was literally saying, well, I've gone through this and this and this, and I'm not messed up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you pause to think, okay, why am I then like, but that's the hard part is we can't necessarily compare ourselves to other people, right? Because everybody deals with things in different ways, and that part of the message has to come through in the conversation, right? Like these events may not have been so significant for you, but for me, like this is how they impacted me. This is what I'm left with. This is why my mind stays focused on X, Y, and Z. So that the conversation can get really long and frustrating and tiring.
I think yeah. Going back to like you saying the same message in different ways, it is it's kind of important to know the person because like if they're a hands-on person, then having them experience stuff with you and like seeing you in that would maybe help them understand more. But if they're emotional person, then you just need to let your emotions, like
Yeah.
you have to be very you have to use different methods to get your point across because someone who is very focused on like they sorry I'm studying that someone who like puts importance to certain things, right? Like
Right.
if someone is very work oriented and they see it's affecting your work, then they're gonna be like, oh, whoa, something must be wrong,
Right.
That's how they'll know because they're like, this doesn't usually happen. But if someone's like um, loves food and you're not eating their food, they're like, what? What's going on? What?
Yeah. And you brought up a great point, right? And that takes a lot of like attention to detail when we're dealing with people is like noticing how they normally act, right? And then when we interact with them, seeing if that's kind of they're acting with us as usual. There's one group of people that we haven't really talked about though, and that's the ones where we don't want to put energy into. And I while I believe that having the tough conversations with your significant other and your parents is really tough. This last group is tough as well because it requires a choice, right?
Saying basically, you are not important enough to me.
Correct. And when we do that, it kind of kicks off all of these evaluations. Like, are you still important enough to have in my life? Are you still important enough to talk to it all, right? And maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But in order to care for ourselves in the proper way, right? In order to focus on our own personal mental health, like we have to be able to make those decisions, right? Where can because by dealing with anxiety and panic, right, and PTSD, we're already going to be emotionally drained just from dealing with the effects of these things. So we don't really have extra resources to give to people who aren't going to be um, valuable in that way,
Right.
right? And don't get me wrong, like I'm not saying people aren't valuable. I'm just saying that the relationships with certain people may not be as important as other ones.
Right. I think for me specifically, like the way I view it, I mean, it's kind of hard to view it this way. It's something you told me, but I try to view it this way: is that you don't owe anyone anything.
Right.
You only give as much as you want to. They don't have to have something. It's what
Right.
you want. And I think that's really important when it comes to this kind of stuff. Is remembering that, like if a sibling is just very disrespectful to you, if like they are not supportive of you, and there's no benefit of having them in your life, even though they're your sibling, you technically don't have to keep them in the know like that. It's
Right.
not that isn't something you're obligated to do just because they are blood.
Right. And the cool thing is that may change over time.
Yeah.
Right. Like our lives are constantly changing, and the people that are in our circle are constantly changing. So that relationship may change later on, where a person who was not as important before becomes important and rises up to these other levels where now you're confiding in them and they're a really important part of your support system. Um, but I just wanted to get those ones that are not qualified for your time out of the way before we keep talking about the hard conversations, because um, as we think about the conversations going forward, right, we want to make sure we're thinking of the right audience, right, and in this sense, the people that we've deemed have earned or the time is valuable.
Like this is the first step, basically. Like you shouldn't be stressing out about how to talk to someone if they already don't meet the first requirement.
Right.
Because then you're already kind of wasting energy,
Right.
doing nothing progressively.
Yeah, and as we all know, like energy is limited.
Right.
So you don't want to get too tired of stressing over that stuff. But as we have these conversations, like I know the last couple conversations with my mom were really good. Like we got really deep into the causes of I guess the trauma that led to my panic and anxiety disorder. And there were some things that she really didn't know about, right? And I hadn't really told a lot of people about them, and probably only the people in that echelon of important relationships will know about them. But I had to get past holding that in, and I had to be able to open up and be like, look, here's what happened, and here's where I'm at with it. And a lot of times when I go through these things, it's because this happens and it reminds me, you know, unconsciously of these events that happened in my life, and there's not much I can really do about it except for use my tools and skills that I've picked up to deal with anxiety and panic, to kind of ground myself and recenter myself to move forward, right? Um, so yeah, like her whole mind changed. I guess it took about 3 years to get her from I don't believe what you're going through to, hey, let's talk about what you're going through and how I can help with other people that I know may be going through stuff. And that was really a cool transition to see, but it took a lot of effort.
And do you think that it was all from your guys' conversations alone, or was there other factors that you think might have affected that?
I think with her it was mostly from our conversations. Like it was, um, I don't think, and I'm not saying that I know everything that went on, but I don't think I know of anything that could have impacted her thoughts of that, um, other than kind of part of the conversations that we had led her to think about her own personal experiences, and I think that may have opened her up to the possibilities of, hey, you know, um, I kind of understand these things now, right? Because then at some point she had to deal with the things that happened in her life and evaluate how that made her feel. And maybe after doing so, right, she came back and like, I understand, you know, what this is and how to do it. Um, but yeah, I think it was the conversations themselves. And that's usually what it takes, right? It takes somebody deciding to devote the energy to educate somebody, right? Because when we're uneducated, we we kind of speculate and we kind of make judgments based on things that we really don't know much about. But once we start understanding another person and what they're going through, we tend to empathize with them and put ourselves in a different perspective to have good conversations and maybe help each other out. So yeah, it's but like I said, it is very energetic. Like you have to be willing to put it in. For work and coworkers, not so much. I know I've been fairly honest at work, but I'm a very open person. Like I don't mind talking about what I go through, but I also think that that's a personal decision, right? You don't always have to be open about what you're going through, um, but you should be open about, you know, what you're dealing with, right? Like it's a lot easier for a boss to understand or a coworker to understand, hey, I'm not feeling well, than it is for you to say nothing and just underperform,
Right.
right? Um, and that's like I said, that's a personal choice. Like how you want to handle those other relationships, those work relationships. That's a personal choice. But I've always considered, or actually not always, since I've been okay with myself, right? I think about if a job or a company is not ready to accept the whole me, then maybe it's not the right company for me,
Mm.
right? Because part of living with this stuff is being able to uh, schedule yourself in a way that's beneficial to your performance, right?
Right.
And sometimes that means that you have to take a few more breaks than normal, or spread your work out a little more, or talk about how things are affecting you in a way that may impact the team. So
And I actually kind of want to go back to like you had said people give up easily, but would it be wrong technically to like start having those conversations with people and realizing after you've had a couple maybe that maybe it isn't worth the energy? Because like you're saying, we only have so much energy, and you start off thinking, this is an important person, but as you go on, it's kind of like, I don't think it's worth the energy though.
no,
Like,
I think it's good to reevaluate the relationship, because what's gonna start to happen as you start having these conversations, as we have these conversations, is we're going to learn more about the person we're talking to, right? Because the way they react and respond to us uh, is going to give us insight and more truly into what this person is all about and what they're thinking about and what they feel about. And if, you know, and I've had conversations with people that I'm like, okay, well, I think we've gone far enough.
Or this is as far as we're going.
Right. And then you're basically like, okay, I know where I stand with this person. I don't know if I need to improve or change that standing at all. So that's enough for you, you know. And then you just change their category from one to another and move on. Like that's just how life is, and that's why I said earlier, like relationships change and they evolve, and some people that were here in the close range, right, the important people may move to the not important anymore people based on, you know, um, if there's, you know, reciprocal energy going on, right? If they're not putting in the same amount of energy into having a relationship with you, then, you know, that's kind of not a fair relationship. So.
Right. I mean, I think honestly, I feel like being able to talk to people about your mental illness is very helpful with finding out if people are putting in the same effort as you, because
Right.
it's much easier to see with like day-to-day interactions. It's like, oh, they bought me a bagel, like, is that's a lot of energy, but it's not. You have to put your own value onto it versus
Right.
like this is literally like very easy to see they're putting lots of energy into me, or you know what, they're not trying at all. I think it is helpful to be able to um, visibly see the amount of energy someone's willing to put in. It's much easier to recognize, you know.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is, and it's the hard part comes when like you could have that person who's physically doing things that let you know that they're putting in energy into your relationship and maybe worth talking to. But once you start having a conversation, then you find out that a lot of it is a facade, so that, you know, it's not for you, it's for others to see what they, well, for themselves, yeah, it could be for themselves, right? But they want others to see what they're doing. It's not necessarily, you know, for your benefit. But that comes over time, and that's something that we grow into as adults, and just kind of understanding how to, you know, read people and learn what they do. Um, but each of those require actual interactions, right? Talking to them and finding out where you actually stand. Um, I think one area we haven't talked about, and I want to spend a few minutes talking about it, is the tough conversations with your significant other, right? Because they kind of fall in the same zone as your parents, but it's a different um, thing, because your parents kind of have to love you, right? They're your parents, right? There's always going to be some connection between
Right,
you two,
that's a better way to put it.
right? There's some connection, but a significant other, there's a chance that at some point they won't be a significant other,
Right.
right? And you know, that's just how life is. But while they are, you have to, you know, have these conversations to let them know who you really are and what you're really going through, because they're probably going to have to put in just as much energy, maybe even more energy than you, to be that support role that you need. And it's really hard to kickstart those conversations, right? Because, I mean, think about it. You're basically telling somebody who you think likes you that, hey, I'm not as good as you think I am, or I'm different than what you see face value. And that's really hard, right? Because your heart's involved, your emotions are involved, and to think, oh man, this person that I've fallen in love with or want to share my time or my life with, you know, they think so highly of me, and now I'm going to shatter that vision of them, of myself to them. How's it going to play out?
I think definitely it also like is harder when they're not going through it either, because like you're trying your best to explain it, you want them to understand, and to honestly they'll never be able to understand.
Right.
Like it'll never be to the point that they'll be like, I know what you're going through. The best that they can do is be like, I'm here for you. That's the best that can happen. And it'll be them, a lot in the beginning will be them being like trying too hard
Right.
and almost making it worse because of how hard they're trying, but they're thinking that they're helping, you know?
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because you know, with my wife, it was always like, oh, you're gonna be okay, or there's nothing wrong, you're fine. And in my mind, I'm like, no, now I'm crazy. Now you're telling me I'm crazy because I'm feeling all these things. Um, but she didn't know that because I hadn't told her that. And then finally, when I told her that, a light bulb went off. I said, okay, so what am I supposed to do in this situation? So being able to be honest with your significant other and have that really brutal conversation of, hey, you know, these are not helpful, these are helpful, this is what I'm going through, this is why. Because we tend to think that in a relationship we can help our partner in certain ways, and if we don't address that, right, then we're kind of leaving them to hang on their own, trying to deal with this thing, and we're not giving them kind of a fair chance at succeeding.
Yeah, because if you're not like open about it or like at least attempting to be honest about it, it will affect their own mindset about the relationship. They're like, I'm not enough. You know, I'm not a. For some reason, whatever I'm doing is making them feel this way. They don't know that they have nothing to do with it.
Right.
But they're over here thinking, wow, I'm like screwing this person up.
Yeah.
And I mean,
and you know the interesting thing, like I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that can happen during an anxiety attack or a panic attack is crying, right? So if you're around your significant other and you're like crying, the assumption is they did something wrong or somebody did something wrong to you to make you cry when the reality is you're dealing with a lot of internal stuff.
mm-hmm.
And the internal stuff is not something that a lot of people can understand. So, you know, that impacts, you know, how they view their relationship with you. Like, I'm always making this person cry.
Yeah.
Like, in what did I do? And then at some point, you know, if you haven't had those conversations, it can be too much, right? If somebody doesn't understand what's going on, and even if they do, um, it's on them to make a decision, just like it's on you to make a decision on having those conversations. It's on them to make a decision. Am I going to invest my time and energy in this? Because now this is a different thing. I'm now in this support system role, and you know, I'm not ready for that, or it's not something I can deal with right now, and it's hard. Those are some of the drawbacks to having the conversation. But a healthy relationship needs to have that honesty with each other. You need to be able to test each other in that way. Like, you're gonna go through stuff, and some of that stuff is not gonna be fun. Can we do it together? Do we have the energy? Are we committed to doing this? And in some cases it's not gonna happen, and we have to be ready to deal with the fallout of that as well, right? And that's another important factor in having that conversation.
It's definitely healthier to know when to let go in certain situations, just
Right.
because forcing it is like it just makes it worse.
Yeah,
Like
it's like having I don't know
a
any.
divorce.
Well, no, I mean,
I don't
no,
know. Like,
I
that's
guess
the first thing.
I guess a divorce would be the right thing to do if the relationship isn't working, right? But let's say if you're a couple and then you decide to have a child to try and make the relationship better, right? Like having
So
a child will not
pre-divorce, but needs divorce. Kind
right, something like that. But we have, you know, without having those conversations and thinking thoroughly, like you could do all kinds of things to try and save a relationship, um, and they'll never work if you're not really dealing with the whole person, right? So as somebody who lives with panic and anxiety and PTSD, like it's very important to emotionally keep yourself number one, right? And it's kind of hard to think of it that way, but if you're not doing well, right, emotionally, mentally, physically, then you really can't do well for others emotionally, mentally, and physically, right? Because you're already at like less than
Mm.
in your own mind.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate something you said earlier too. Is like with the significant other specifically, you don't have to know what's happening in the moment. You don't have to know what's going on right away. But as long as you're just like, hey, I'm not feeling well right now. If something happens in the next hour, it's probably because of that. If like
Right.
if I push you away, if a cold shoulder is happening, just know it's because I'm not feeling well. It's
Right.
not because of you. You didn't do anything.
Right.
And you don't need to know the cause. You don't need to know, oh, it's a panic attack, or oh, I'm having like a dissociation episode. It's just something's going on.
Yeah, but the key is to be honest.
Right.
To say, hey, I'm not feeling good. I need the space or whatever. But just to kind of round things out for this video, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first important thing is to decide, if a person is worth having the conversation. Are they valuable enough in your life? Is that relationship important enough to spend energy on having those conversations, right?
I don't. I feel. Sorry, I don't. Maybe valuable is the wrong word.
Right.
Because, I mean, one of the conversations we were saying you should have is with yourself, and if someone doesn't deem themselves valuable enough, they'll never have this conversation with themselves.
Right.
So maybe like.
What's a better way to say it then? Important enough? Isn't that the same? Let's see. Okay, let's put it this way. Let's make it easier. Let's say that the relationship warrants your energy and effort.
Okay.
Then then we're not talking about value, but that if you want that person in your life or not, right? So that's kind of the first one, and at the same time, you're already having those conversations of what you're dealing with, right? The internal conversations are kicking off, and then when you start having these conversations, remember, everybody comes from a different place, right? So you have to figure out the right way to approach the person you're dealing with, and you may have to come back a few times with the same information in a different way, right? And I think the third thing is to remember that relationships change, right? What was important at one point can no longer be important, and what was not important can move into that important category. But in all of those cases, being honest and forthcoming with as much as you feel comfortable with is a big part of having that conversation.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you all for joining us. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, please shoot me an email at empanic2021@gmail.com. If you have any topics that you want covered, send an email to the same place. If you're feeling like you may have some mental health issues, please get in touch with a mental health provider and start getting some proper treatment. If you are in a crisis mode and need immediate assistance, please dial 911 and ask for immediate assistance. Remember, we are not alone. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.